and welcome to We Are Biostimulant, the podcast of biostimulant.com. I'm Monica, and today we are joined by Keith Jones, the Executive Director of the Biological Products Industry Alliance, or BPIA, to discuss the regulatory outlook for biostimulants in the U.S. market. Keith, welcome, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Well, Keith, to get started, tell us a little bit about the BPIA.
Sure. BPIA is the Biological Products Industry Alliance. We are a trade association based in the Washington, D.C. area, but our membership is actually international. We have over 135 member companies all over the world, and those companies range from small, innovative companies developing brand new technologies up to some of the largest agrochemical companies in the world. And what all our members have in common is that they are all involved in some way with biological products. And when I say biological products, I specifically mean biopesticides, biostimulants, and biofertilizers. And our members include manufacturers, marketers, distributors, and even service providers related to those kinds of products.
And the objectives. What are the objectives of the BPIA?
So BPIA's official mission or mission statement is advancing sustainability, biological solutions. Now, we do that by promoting the responsible development of safe and effective biological products, again, including biopesticides, biostimulants, and biofertilizers, as beneficial tools for commercial agriculture, for forestry, golf courses, home gardens, horticulture, ornamentals, public health, and more. We accomplish our mission through education, outreach, and advocacy activities, and we do that at the state, federal, and even the international level. Our main objective is to help our members to provide biological solutions that benefit growers, consumers, and the environment.
Tell us a little bit how the BPIA began. Was there a particular problem to be solved or?
So the story that I've been told by several different people, because I wasn't here at the time, it was about 20 years ago. 5 biopesticide companies came together at that time because they felt that they needed their own association to be their voice or the voice of biological products with regulators like EPA and USDA and legislators, both at the states, but also with the United States Congress. At the start, BPIA actually stood for Biopesticides Industry Alliance and focused a lot on regulatory issues related to biopesticides. Now, almost 2 decades later, we're closing in on 150 members. We still have many biopesticide companies as members, and we still deal with a lot of regulatory issues. But as I've already said, our membership has grown, not just in our numbers, but also in the types of companies, and certainly our portfolio of issues is much broader today.
Okay, and how did you decide to get involved?
Well, my background is as an environmental attorney, and I'd worked as general counsel for a couple of larger associations in Washington, D.C., and I had also been executive director of an environmental nonprofit. What attracted me to the BPIA was the potential that I saw for the association and the industry. I became executive director of BPIA back in 2015, and at that time, we had about 85 members, and our name still had biopesticides in it. And during my time with BPIA, we've increased our membership by almost 60%, and we changed our name to the Biological Products Industry Alliance so people know we don't just represent biopesticides, but also biofertilizers and biostimulants. And those changes have driven a lot of the growth of our association.
Okay, and for clarification, Keith, can you help us understand how BPIA categorizes biologicals and where biostimulants fit in?
Sure. So I think you have to look at biological products as a spectrum, especially if you are looking at how they are registered, regulated, and even marketed in the United States. On one side, you have fertilizers, which includes biofertilizers, and fertilizers in the United States are handled by the states. There are state laws, state regulations, state regulators. There's no federal fertilizer law or regulation in the United States. On the other side, you have pesticides, which includes biological pesticides or biopesticides. In the US, all pesticides are regulated by the Federal Fungicide, Insecticide, and Rodenticide Act, or FIFRA, which is applied by the United States Environmental Protection Agency. But there's also state laws and regulations that apply to pesticides. Now we have this new product category somewhere in the middle of that continuum that we call biostimulants.
And Keith, how about the current state of biostimulant regulation in the U.S.? Can you talk a bit about that?
Sure. So right now in the United States, you cannot call your product a biostimulant. You can't put the term biostimulant on your label. You can't make a biostimulant claim on your label. For example, a biostimulant claims would be that your product helps with nutrient uptake or it addresses abiotic stress. Prior to 2018, the term biostimulant did not appear in any federal, state, or municipal law or regulation that I'm aware of. BPIA actually worked very hard for several years, along with a number of other stakeholders and associations, and the term biostimulant was described in the 2018 Farm Bill. And the Farm Bill is an important piece of legislation that Congress does about every 5 years, and it covers numerous agricultural topics. In 2018, the 2018 Farm Bill, Congress directed the United States Department of Agriculture, or the USDA, in consultation with the EPA to draft a report to the President of the United States and to the United States Congress, and that report was on plant biostimulants. USDA, in consultation with EPA, did submit that report at the end of 2019. In that report, USDA proposed a definition for the term biostimulant, and I'll just briefly read this. The definition that USDA proposed is a material that contains a substance, microorganism, or mixture thereof that would apply to seeds, plants, the rhizosphere, soil, or other growth media, act to support a plant's natural nutrition processes independently of the material's nutrient content. The plant biostimulant thereby improves nutrient availability, uptake or use efficiency, tolerance to abiotic stress, and consequent growth, development, quality of yield. That proposed definition was an important step forward, but it's obviously not the final step by any means. That definition can be the foundation for the future regulatory landscape for these products.
Okay. Okay. Now the differences of or how the U.S. regulates biostimulants. How does that compare between the various biologicals?
So, biopesticides, which are under FIFRA, include PGRs or plant growth regulators, and they're pesticides under FIFRA. Like all pesticides in the US, they're regulated by EPA under federal law, specifically FIFRA. There are also state laws and regs that apply to pesticides. Biofertilizers are fertilizers. They're regulated by the states. Biostimulants are not yet an established product category, so they are not regulated as biostimulants. There certainly are biostimulant products that are in commerce or available for purchase and use. Some have had nutrients actually added to them, so then they are sold and regulated as fertilizers. Or the product might be microbial in nature, and at a high enough level, it could have a pesticidal quality. So they're actually regulated and sold as pesticides. But in either of those cases, what you're doing is you're forcing a square peg into a round hole. Doing that doesn't serve the best interest of the growers who use these products. It certainly doesn't serve the manufacturers, the folks who are trying to sell these, and it really doesn't even serve the interest of the regulators. What's happening is folks are trying to work within the regulatory framework that they currently have available to them, but it really is not meant for these kinds of products.
So, no real regulatory process yet for biostimulants. Why is a regulatory process that is specific to biostimulants? Why would that be important?
So it's not necessarily that a regulatory process that is specific to biostimulants is important or even needed. What is really important and needed for biostimulants, and this is true for any product, especially any new product for that matter, is we need a clear path to market, which industry currently we don't have that. But the biostimulant industry has identified several goals that will get us hopefully to a clear path to market. Those goals are simply the ability to use the term biostimulant to describe your product, specifically to use that term on your label, to be able to make biostimulant claims on your label or on your website or however you want to promote or advertise your product. Industry wants to be able to use one label in every state in the United States so that you don't have different label requirements for different states for the exact same product. Industry would really like global consistency. Using one label around the world would actually be the ideal. To get there, we will need some element of safety assessment. Where necessary, we need to address active ingredients with multiple functions. All of this is necessary to establish a clear, consistent, and predictable path to market for biostimulants, and regulation would just be part of that path.
With all that you are discussing, Keith, or out of all that you are discussing, what would you say is the biggest challenge that biostimulant companies are facing as they try to market their products, specifically in the US?
Is forcing your product into the existing regulatory framework that is already there, but was not intended or designed for biostimulants. I mean, the reality is they don't even recognize the term. So that's a big challenge.
Yep, understood. The most urgent needs yet to be addressed.
So the most urgent needs that need to be addressed are establishing that legal definition for plant biostimulants, clarifying or possibly modifying what is meant by the term plant regulators in federal law and regulation, and then implementing the recommendations that USDA made in its report to Congress and to the president. The last, but certainly not least, assuring development and implementation of appropriate standards and criteria for plant biostimulants. And that's something that BPIA is actually actively working on with a broad group of stakeholders.
Very good. Now, the current U.S. regulatory situation, how does that compare with other regions around the world? For example, the EU.
So, depending on who you talk to, it seems like Europe is probably a few years ahead of the US as far as regulating biostimulants. The EU is putting biostimulants under its fertilizer law and regulations, but my understanding is that they are putting it into that arena of fertilizer regulation to specifically exclude it and regulate it as something different than a traditional fertilizer, because they recognize that these products are a new and different product category. In the US, we are watching closely what is going on in Europe and other regions because we would like to coordinate and ideally achieve consistency on the international level.
Yes, you mentioned the need for consistency earlier as well. I think a lot of companies would certainly benefit from that. In the near future, Keith, where do you see the regulatory process for biostimulants evolving to?
In the near term, industry is really trying to help things evolve or at least continue to move forward. So BPIA, along with other stakeholders, has established 4 work streams that are actively tackling the key issues. We have an efficacy work stream, which is working on generating measurable and repeatable scientifically sound data and documentation to support a biostimulant efficacy claim. We have a safety work stream, which is trying to develop or enhance the way we look at safety for these products, which are generally naturally occurring, low risk, but this work includes a decision tree with criteria for looking at things like heavy metals and pathogens. A lot of this already exists in the US at both the state and federal level. So it's really more about bringing everything together in a way that is appropriate and applicable for biostimulant products. We also have a composition and methods development work stream that I actually co-chair. With that work stream, we're trying to establish product composition and criteria guidelines for biostimulants, which is a challenge because there are potentially so many different types of biostimulants, including ones that will be developed in the future. And then finally, we have a stakeholder coordination work stream, which is just what it sounds like. Through that effort, we're trying to coordinate and include input from a wide variety of points of view.
Okay, that's near term. How about the long term? Where do you see that the U.S. has to get to in the long term?
In the long term, the US and really around the world, we need to get to a clear, consistent, predictable path to market for this product category called biostimulants. Once this happens, I've been told by economists and people who track market trends, we should see an explosion of growth in this sector, which would result in greater investment in research and development for these technologies. And at that point, the sky becomes the limit for biostimulants.
Interesting. And what factors do you see as the most important to drive that process?
Right now, there are several important factors for driving this process, but the most important is leadership. Currently, industry is taking the lead through the work streams that I mentioned earlier, but that work is foundational. At some point, either USDA or EPA or the states, or more likely some combination of federal and state officials, or perhaps even legislators, they will need to feel a sense of investment or ownership in this new product category to really move things forward. That will only come if they see the opportunity and the potential value that industry already sees in biostimulants. What I mean is the potential benefits to growers, to consumers, and to the environment. All industry can do really is what we plan to do, and that's deliver high quality recommendations for criteria and standards for biostimulants, and do that in a timely manner, and then encourage regulators and others that need to take it and run with it so that those recommendations get put into place. And possibly even improve on our recommendations, but really make things happen.
And how about obstacles, Keith? What are some of the largest obstacles we might see getting there?
So I'm an optimist by nature, so I try not to dwell on obstacles and I try to look for solutions. But obviously, the entire world is still dealing with the global pandemic and then the resulting economic consequences. And those are big issues that impact almost everything, including agriculture, and they're going to impact the biostimulant industry and already have. It's always a challenge under any circumstances. It's a challenge to get people's attention and to get resources for any issue. And that's even more true now in 2020. But even within that context, I believe the benefits that biostimulants present for sustainable agriculture will overcome any of these obstacles.
And any ideas, Keith, as to what the various constituents can do to enable this process and help keep it moving along?
I think we just have to continue to build on our broad base of stakeholder support across the ag value chain. The more people who come to understand the potential benefits of biostimulants and who are willing to participate to help create that clear path to market that I've talked about, the sooner we will get there. I actually just heard the CEO of one of our member companies say something like, the future is bright, the future is biostimulants.
Well, very good. Here at biostimulant.com, we tend to agree with that sentiment. Keith, it's been quite interesting talking to you. We so appreciate your perspective on not just what BPIA does for the industry, but also your thoughts on where the industry and regulation is currently in the U.S. and where we're heading. So thank you so much for sharing your insights and joining us.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you for listening. To learn more about biostimulants, we invite you to visit biostimulant.com. And of course, if you like what you heard, we invite you to see all our podcast episodes on that website. Once again, I'm Monica, and thank you for listening.